I still remember the exact moment I realized that the nephew I had loved like my own son had been systematically destroying my life for over 2 years. It was a Tuesday evening in late November, and I was sitting alone in the parking lot of what used to be my family's favorite restaurant, the one where we had celebrated every birthday, every graduation, every milestone for the past 15 years. Through the window, I could see them all gathered around the long table near the fireplace. My brother Richard, his wife Sandra, my parents, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, every single member of my family laughing and raising glasses in what appeared to be some kind of celebration. And there, at the head of the table, sat Tyler, my 29-year-old nephew, the young man I had helped raise, the young man I had given everything to, smiling. That charming smile I now understood was nothing more than a mask hiding the most calculated cruelty I had ever experienced. Not a single one of them had told me about this gathering. Not one of them had invited me. In fact, when I had called my mother earlier that day to see if she wanted to have dinner, she had told me she was feeling too tired to go out. That lie, seeing her there with her arm around Tyler, laughing at something he had said, was when everything finally clicked into place. Every strange look I had received over the past 2 years, every phone call that went unanswered, every canceled plan, every whispered conversation that stopped the moment I walked into a room, it all made sense now. But I am getting ahead of myself. If I am going to tell you this story properly, if I am going to help you understand just how deep this betrayal went and how I eventually exposed the truth, I need to take you back to the beginning. I need to tell you about the nephew I thought I knew, the family I thought I had, and the elaborate web of lies that almost destroyed everything I had worked my entire life to build. My name is Maggie Thornton, and I am 54 years old. I live just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in a modest but comfortable home that I purchased with money I earned through 30 years of hard work in the medical device industry. I started as a sales representative when I was 24, fresh out of college with a degree in biomedical engineering and a determination to prove that a woman from a working class family could make something of herself. By the time I was 40, I had worked my way up to regional director. By 45, I was vice president of sales for the entire East Coast division of one of the largest medical device companies in the country. I earned every promotion, every raise, every bit of success through long hours, personal sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. When my husband David passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack when I was 47, I was devastated. We had been married for 23 years, and although we had only been blessed with one child, our daughter Emily, our marriage had been solid and loving. Losing David nearly broke me, but I pushed through. I had Emily to think about, and I had my career, and I had my family, or so I believed. My younger brother Richard was always the more sensitive of the two of us. Growing up, I was the driven one, the one with plans and ambitions, while Richard was the dreamer who never quite found his footing. Our parents favored him, I think, precisely because he seemed to need more protection. When he married Sandra right out of high school because she was pregnant with Tyler, everyone rallied around him. When he dropped out of community college because he found it too stressful, everyone understood. When his small landscaping business failed after 3 years, everyone helped him get back on his feet. I use the word everyone, but what I really mean is me. I was the one who co-signed the loan for his first truck. I was the one who paid off his credit card debt when it spiraled out of control. I was the one who made the down payment on their house when they could not qualify for a mortgage on their own. I did these things without hesitation, without expectation of repayment, because that is what family does. At least that is what I believed family did. Tyler was born when Richard was 19 and Sandra was 18. I was 24 at the time, already starting my career, and I fell in love with that baby the moment I saw him. He was the most beautiful child with bright blue eyes and a smile that could light up any room. Because Richard and Sandra were so young and so overwhelmed, I stepped in to help in every way I could. I babysat Tyler constantly. I paid for his daycare when Sandra wanted to go back to work. I bought his school clothes. I put money into a college fund for him every single year. When he showed an interest in business during high school, I was the one who encouraged him. I was the one who got him internships at companies where I had connections. I was the one who wrote him a recommendation letter for college and then paid for half of his tuition when Richard and Sandra could not afford it. I loved that boy. I loved him like he was my own flesh and blood, which of course he was. I never for a moment imagined that he saw me as anything other than the aunt who adored him. The first sign that something was wrong came about 2.5 years ago, shortly after I turned 52. It was subtle enough that I almost missed it entirely. Tyler had graduated from business school and was struggling to find a position that matched his expectations. He had always been ambitious, which I admired, but he seemed to believe that he deserved to start at the top rather than working his way up like everyone else. When he came to me asking for a job at my company, I was hesitant. Not because I did not want to help him, but because I knew that hiring family members could create complications. Still, he was persuasive and charming, and he assured me that he just needed a foot in the door, a chance to prove himself. Against my better judgment, I spoke to our human resources department and helped him secure an entry-level position in our marketing department. He would not be working directly under me, which I thought would prevent any accusations of favoritism. For the first 6 months, everything seemed fine. Tyler appeared to be doing well in his role. He was punctual, professional, and well liked by his colleagues. I was proud of him. I made a point of not interfering or checking up on him too often because I wanted him to succeed on his own merits. But then I started to notice small things. Conversations that stopped when I entered the break room. Colleagues who had always been friendly suddenly seeming distant or uncomfortable around me. At first, I attributed it to stress, to the normal ebbs and flows of office dynamics. But then my assistant, a woman named Patricia, who had worked with me for over a decade, pulled me aside one afternoon with a concerned expression on her face. She told me that there were rumors circulating about me, rumors that I had taken credit for other people's work, rumors that I had sabotaged a colleague's presentation to make myself look better, rumors that I was difficult to work with and created a hostile environment for my team. I was shocked. None of these things were true. I had always prided myself on being a fair and supportive leader. I asked Patricia where these rumors were coming from, and she said she did not know, but they seemed to have started in the marketing department where Tyler worked. I told myself it could not be Tyler. He would never do something like that to me. He had to know how hard I had worked to build my reputation. He had watched me succeed for his entire life. He was family. There had to be some other explanation. So I did nothing. I assumed the rumors would die down on their own. I assumed that my track record would speak for itself. That was my first mistake. About 2 months later, Tyler came to my office with a proposal. He had been working on a new marketing strategy, he said, and he wanted my input before presenting it to his supervisors. I was flattered that he valued my opinion. I spent an entire weekend reviewing his work, making notes, offering suggestions. Some of his ideas were good, but many of them needed refinement. I rewrote entire sections of his proposal, adding my own insights and expertise. When I gave it back to him, he thanked me profusely. He told me I was the best aunt anyone could ever ask for. He hugged me and told me he could not have done it without me. I believed every word. A month later, I heard through the corporate grapevine that Tyler had received a significant promotion. He had presented a marketing strategy that had impressed the executive team so much that they had fast-tracked him to a junior management position. When I congratulated him at a family dinner, he smiled that charming smile and said it was all thanks to hard work and determination. He did not mention my help. He did not acknowledge that I had essentially rewritten his entire proposal. At the time, I told myself it was fine. I had not helped him for recognition. I had helped him because I loved him. But something about the way he looked at me that night, a brief flicker of something cold behind his eyes, stayed with me. The rumors at work continued to spread. Over the next several months, I noticed that colleagues who had been my allies for years were suddenly keeping their distance. Projects I was supposed to lead were reassigned to other departments. Meeting invites that should have included me somehow got lost or overlooked. My supervisor, a man I had worked with for over a decade, started questioning my decisions in ways he never had before. When I asked him directly if there was a problem, he hesitated before saying that some concerns had been raised about my leadership style. When I pressed him for specifics, he could not give me any. Just vague references to complaints and discomfort. It was like fighting smoke. I could not see my enemy, could not identify the source of the attacks, could not defend myself against accusations that were never made directly to my face. At home, things were equally confusing. Family gatherings that had always included me started happening without my knowledge. I would find out through social media that my brother and his family had hosted a barbecue or a birthday party and I had not been invited. When I asked Richard about it, he would give me vague excuses. Oh, it was last minute. We thought you were busy. It was nothing special, just a small thing. But the photos told a different story. Extended family members, aunts and uncles, cousins I had not seen in months, all gathered together without me. My mother, who I had always been close to, started taking longer and longer to return my phone calls. When we did speak, she seemed distant, distracted, like she was holding something back. When I asked her if something was wrong, she would say everything was fine, but her voice told a different story. Emily was the one who first put into words what I could not bring myself to accept. She had come home for the weekend, and we were sitting in my kitchen sharing a bottle of wine. When she asked me if I had noticed that the family seemed different lately, I admitted that I had. She told me that Tyler had been making comments about me to various family members, comments that painted me in a very unflattering light. She said he had told her mother, his grandmother, that I had become difficult and demanding since David died, that I had unrealistic expectations of everyone around me, that I had tried to control his career and became angry when he wanted to succeed on his own. She said he had told Richard that I looked down on him, that I made him feel like a failure, that I only helped him financially so I could hold it over his head. She said he had told Sandra that I had never liked her, that I thought she was not good enough for Richard, that I had tried to convince Richard not to marry her when they were young. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath my feet. None of these things were true. I had never looked down on Richard. I had only ever tried to help him. I had never tried to control Tyler's career. I had only ever supported him. I had never disliked Sandra, even though, if I am being completely honest, I had always found her to be somewhat cold and materialistic. But I had never said a word against her. I had welcomed her into our family with open arms. Where was Tyler getting these lies? Why was he telling them? Emily did not know the answers, but she knew what she had heard. She told me that Tyler had been systematically going through the family, one person at a time, telling each of them a slightly different version of the same basic story. That I had changed, that I had become bitter and controlling, that I used money to manipulate people, that I thought I was better than everyone else. Each story was tailored to the insecurities of the person he was telling it to. For my mother, he emphasized how I had become cold and distant since David died. For Richard, he emphasized how I made him feel like a failure. For Sandra, he emphasized how I had always disapproved of her. For my cousins, he emphasized how I flaunted my success while looking down on those who had less. Every single story was designed to hit its target exactly where it hurt most. I did not want to believe it. I could not believe it. This was Tyler. This was the baby I had held in my arms. This was the child I had watched take his first steps. This was the young man whose college graduation I had attended with tears of pride in my eyes. Why would he do this? What had I ever done to make him hate me this much? The answer, when it finally came, was more painful than I could have imagined. But before I tell you what I eventually discovered, I need to tell you about what happened next. Because Tyler was not finished. The campaign against me at work was just beginning. And what he had planned for my family was nothing compared to what he had planned for my career. About 3 months after Emily first warned me about what Tyler was saying behind my back, I was called into a meeting with human resources. There had been a complaint, they said, an anonymous complaint alleging that I had engaged in bullying behavior toward a subordinate. The complaint was detailed and specific, citing incidents that I knew had never happened. I was accused of yelling at an employee in front of their colleagues, of giving someone an unfairly negative performance review as retaliation for a personal conflict, of creating a hostile work environment through constant criticism and unreasonable demands. I was stunned. I had done none of these things. I asked to see the specific details of the complaint, to know who had made it, so I could address the allegations directly. But the company's policy protected anonymous complainants. All I could do was deny the accusations and hope that an investigation would clear my name. The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, I was placed on administrative leave. I could not access my email, could not enter the office, could not speak to my colleagues or my team. I sat at home, alone, going over every interaction I could remember from the past year, trying to understand where these accusations could have come from. And then, slowly, the pieces started to fall into place. The rumors about me being difficult, the colleagues who had suddenly grown distant, the projects that had been reassigned, the meeting invites that had somehow gotten lost. Someone had been laying the groundwork for this moment for a very long time. Someone had been carefully building a case against me, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of everyone I worked with, creating a narrative that made these false accusations seem plausible. And I was beginning to understand who that someone was. I called Emily and asked her to do something for me. I asked her to find out discreetly if Tyler had any connection to anyone in my company's human resources department. She was reluctant at first. She did not want to believe that her cousin could be capable of something so calculated, so cruel, but she agreed to look into it. What she found confirmed my worst fears. Tyler had been dating a woman named Stephanie Mitchell for the past 8 months. Stephanie Mitchell worked in my company's human resources department. She was, in fact, one of the people responsible for handling employee complaints. Everything clicked into place. Tyler had cultivated a relationship with someone who had access to my personnel file, my performance reviews, my team's feedback, someone who could plant anonymous complaints, someone who could influence the outcome of an investigation, someone who could help him destroy my career from the inside while I remained completely oblivious. The realization was devastating, not just because of what Tyler had done, but because of how long it must have taken him to plan it. This was not impulsive. This was not a moment of anger or jealousy. This was a calculated, methodical campaign to ruin me, executed over months, possibly years, with patience and precision I would never have believed possible from the boy I had loved. The investigation concluded that there was insufficient evidence to substantiate the complaint against me. I was allowed to return to work, but the damage was done. My reputation had been tarnished. Colleagues who had once respected me now looked at me with suspicion. Opportunities that should have been mine were given to others. I was passed over for a promotion I had been expecting. My supervisor suggested, gently but firmly, that perhaps it was time for me to consider a transition to a less demanding role. The message was clear. My career was over. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because Tyler had successfully convinced everyone that I had. Meanwhile, my family continued to pull away. The holidays that year were the loneliest I had ever experienced. My mother told me she was spending Thanksgiving with Richard and his family because it was easier for everyone. My brother stopped answering my calls altogether. At Christmas, I received a brief text message from him saying he thought it was best if we took some time apart. No explanation, no discussion, just a cold dismissal of the relationship we had shared for nearly 50 years. I tried to reach out to my parents, to my aunts and uncles, to my cousins, but the responses were always the same. Polite but distant, apologetic but firm. It was as if I had become a stranger to my own family. And through it all, Tyler was there, at every gathering I was excluded from, playing the role of the dutiful nephew, the caring grandson, the beloved cousin. According to what Emily could gather, he had positioned himself as the family's golden child, the one who had tried so hard to maintain a relationship with me despite my difficult behavior, the one who had finally been forced to set boundaries for his own mental health, the victim of my unreasonable expectations and controlling nature. The injustice of it was suffocating. I had spent my entire life giving to this family. I had sacrificed weekends and vacations to help Richard with his business. I had paid for Tyler's education. I had been there for every crisis, every celebration, every moment when someone needed support. And now I was the villain. Now I was the one who had to be cut off, ostracized, forgotten, because Tyler had decided, for reasons I still did not fully understand, that I had to be destroyed. Emily was my only lifeline during those dark months. She refused to believe Tyler's lies, partly because she knew me better than anyone, and partly because she had seen the way he looked at me when he thought no one was watching. There was something in his eyes, she told me, something cold and satisfied, like he was enjoying watching me suffer. She suggested that I confront him directly, demand an explanation, but I was not ready for that. I needed to understand what was really happening first. I needed to know why. The answer came from an unexpected source. About 6 months after my career effectively ended, I received a phone call from an attorney I had never heard of. He introduced himself as Robert Chen, and he said he was handling the estate of a woman named Evelyn Thornton, my great aunt on my father's side. I barely knew Aunt Evelyn. She had moved to California decades ago, and I had only met her a handful of times at family reunions when I was a child. I knew she had never married, never had children, and had done quite well for herself in commercial real estate, but I had no idea she had any particular affection for me. Apparently, I was wrong. Robert Chen told me that Aunt Evelyn had passed away 3 weeks earlier and that she had left me a substantial inheritance. When he told me the amount, I had to sit down. $3.2 million. In her will, Aunt Evelyn had written a personal note to me, which Robert read over the phone. She said she had always admired my determination and my work ethic. She said she had been proud to watch me succeed in a man's world, just as she had done. She said she wanted her money to go to someone who had earned their success, not someone who expected it to be handed to them. She specifically mentioned that she had considered leaving her estate to Richard, but had decided against it because she believed he would never learn to stand on his own if people kept rescuing him. She also mentioned that she had initially considered Tyler, but had changed her mind after some concerning things she had heard about him from another family member. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. Not just because of the money, although that was certainly life-changing, but because of what Aunt Evelyn's will meant. If other family members knew about this inheritance, if Tyler knew about it, then suddenly everything made sense. The campaign against me had started roughly 2.5 years ago. That was around the time Aunt Evelyn would have been updating her will, consulting with family members about who should receive what. If Tyler had somehow found out that I was being considered for a significant inheritance, and if he wanted that money for himself, then destroying my relationship with the family would serve two purposes. First, it might convince Aunt Evelyn to change her will in his favor. Second, if that failed, it would ensure that I was isolated and vulnerable when the money came, making it easier for him to somehow get his hands on it. I called Robert Chen back and asked him some careful questions. He confirmed that Aunt Evelyn had updated her will multiple times over the past 3 years. The first version, drafted about 2.5 years ago, had actually named Tyler as the primary beneficiary, but about a year and a half ago, she had changed it to name me instead. Robert did not know the specific reason for the change, but he said Aunt Evelyn had mentioned something about being disappointed by information she had received about Tyler's character. 6 months after that, she had updated the will again, this time adding a provision that specifically excluded Tyler from receiving any portion of the estate under any circumstances. She had also added language making it clear that if I predeceased her, the money would go to charity rather than to any other family member. Whatever she had learned about Tyler, it had been serious enough to make her want to ensure he never saw a penny of her money. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than despair. I felt clarity. Tyler had not destroyed my life because he hated me. He had destroyed my life because he wanted my money. He had found out somehow that Aunt Evelyn was planning to leave me a fortune, and he had set out to ensure that either I was written out of the will or I was destroyed to the point where he could manipulate the situation to his advantage. When Aunt Evelyn had seen through him and cut him out entirely, he had doubled down on destroying me, perhaps out of spite, perhaps because he hoped I would die before she did, and he could somehow contest the will, or perhaps simply because he could not stand the thought of me having something he believed should be his. I finally understood my enemy, and now it was time to plan my response. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator. Her name was Janet Reeves, and she came highly recommended by Robert Chen as someone who specialized in financial fraud and family disputes. I told Janet everything: the rumors at work, the complaints, the campaign to isolate me from my family, the timing of Tyler's behavior relative to Aunt Evelyn's will. Janet listened carefully, took notes, and told me that in her experience, people like Tyler rarely limited their schemes to one victim. If he was capable of orchestrating something this elaborate against me, he had probably done similar things before. She advised me to let her dig into his history before I made any moves. Over the next 3 months, Janet uncovered a pattern that made me sick to my stomach. Tyler had a history of manipulation and financial misconduct going back to his college years. He had convinced a girlfriend to take out student loans in her name to help pay for his expenses, then broken up with her and left her with the debt. He had worked for a small marketing firm for about a year after graduation, before I had gotten him the job at my company, and had been quietly let go after suspicions arose that he had been inflating expense reports. He had borrowed money from 3 different relatives, including my parents, with promises to pay it back that he had never fulfilled. He had even been involved in a failed real estate venture where several small investors, mostly friends of his parents, had lost money while Tyler somehow managed to walk away unscathed. None of these incidents had ever been reported to the police. None of them had ever resulted in serious consequences. Because every time Tyler got caught, someone stepped in to protect him, usually his parents, sometimes me. We had all been so eager to believe the best about him, so afraid to rock the boat, that we had allowed him to become what he was. But the most damning information Janet uncovered was about Tyler's relationship with Stephanie Mitchell, the human resources woman at my company. Stephanie had left the company about a month after my investigation concluded, and Janet tracked her down in Connecticut, where she was working for a nonprofit organization. When Janet approached her, Stephanie was initially defensive, but when Janet explained that she was investigating Tyler for potential fraud, Stephanie broke down. She told Janet that Tyler had pursued her deliberately, knowing that she worked at my company. He had charmed her, made her feel special, convinced her that I was a terrible person who had ruined his life and needed to be taught a lesson. She had believed him. She had accessed my personnel file. She had shared information with him that helped him craft the anonymous complaint. She had encouraged colleagues to come forward with negative feedback about me, even coaching some of them on what to say. By the time she realized what she had done, she was in too deep. Tyler had made it clear that if she ever told anyone the truth, he would expose her role in the scheme and destroy her career just as he had destroyed mine. She had quit her job and moved away, hoping to escape him and start over. Janet recorded Stephanie's entire confession with Stephanie's permission. Stephanie said she had been living with guilt and fear for months, and she was relieved to finally tell someone the truth. She agreed to sign an affidavit confirming everything she had told Janet, and she said she would be willing to testify if it ever came to that. She also gave Janet access to her old text messages with Tyler, which included explicit discussions of how they were going to take me down. Some of the messages were so cruel, so gleeful in their anticipation of my suffering, that I could barely bring myself to read them. Tyler had written things like, "Can't wait to see her face when she realizes her career is over," and "She thinks she's so much better than everyone, she deserves what's coming." There was not a shred of remorse, not a moment of hesitation. He had enjoyed destroying me. Armed with this information, I could have gone straight to my family. I could have shown them the evidence, exposed Tyler's lies, and demanded they apologize for the way they had treated me. But I knew that would not work. Tyler had spent years conditioning them to distrust me. If I came at them with accusations, they would assume I was lying, manipulating, trying to turn them against their beloved Tyler. They would rally around him and dismiss me as the bitter aunt who could not accept that she was the problem. I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to let them discover the truth for themselves. I started by reaching out to my mother. I did not confront her about the months of silence or the family gatherings I had been excluded from. Instead, I sent her a brief, warm message saying I had been going through a difficult time and I was doing some reflecting on my life and my relationships. I said I wanted to understand where things had gone wrong with our family, and I asked if she would be willing to talk to me about it. To my surprise, she agreed. We met for coffee at a little cafe near her house, and I let her talk. I listened without defending myself, without getting angry, without pointing fingers. I asked gentle questions about what she had heard, what she believed, what had made her pull away from me. And as she talked, I heard Tyler's words coming out of her mouth, the same phrases, the same framing, the same subtle distortions of reality. She told me I had become controlling and critical. She told me I looked down on Richard. She told me I used money to manipulate people. When I asked her for specific examples, she could not give me any. All she could say was that Tyler had told her these things and Tyler would never lie. I did not argue. I simply said that I was sorry she had been hurt by whatever she believed I had done, and I asked her to keep an open mind. Then I changed the subject and spent the rest of our conversation talking about neutral topics: her garden, her book club, her health. When we said goodbye, she seemed confused but not hostile. It was a start. Over the next several weeks, I did the same thing with other family members. I reached out to aunts and uncles, to cousins I had not spoken to in months. I did not defend myself. I did not accuse Tyler. I simply listened to their concerns, apologized for any pain I might have caused, and asked them to give me a chance to show them who I really was. Some of them were receptive, others were cold and dismissive, but I planted seeds of doubt. I made them start to question, even slightly, whether the narrative Tyler had constructed was entirely accurate. Meanwhile, I was preparing my real weapon. I had Janet compile all of her evidence into a comprehensive report. The recorded confession from Stephanie, the text messages, the pattern of financial misconduct, the timeline showing how Tyler's campaign against me had coincided with Aunt Evelyn's will. I also had Robert Chen prepare documentation showing that Aunt Evelyn had specifically cut Tyler out of her will because of concerns about his character. And I began quietly reaching out to some of Tyler's other victims: the ex-girlfriend with the student loans, the relatives who had never been repaid, the investors who had lost money in his failed real estate scheme. I was building a case, brick by brick, that would be impossible to dismiss. The opportunity to use this case came about 4 months later at my mother's 75th birthday party. I had been invited, somewhat reluctantly, after my months of patient outreach. Tyler was there, of course, holding court as always, charming the relatives who adored him. When he saw me, he smiled that cold smile and came over to greet me. He hugged me like nothing had happened, like he had not spent years trying to destroy me. "Aunt Maggie," he said warmly, "it's so good to see you. I've been worried about you." The audacity of it took my breath away, but I smiled and hugged him back. I had learned his game. Two could play it. The party went on for several hours. I mingled with relatives, made pleasant conversation, acted as if everything was normal. I watched Tyler working the room, always charming, always attentive, always performing. And I waited for my moment. It came when my mother stood up to give a little speech about how grateful she was to have her family around her. She mentioned everyone who had helped plan the party. She thanked Richard and Sandra for hosting. She thanked Tyler especially, calling him the best grandson anyone could ask for. And then, almost as an afterthought, she thanked me for coming, noting that it was nice to have the whole family together again. When she finished, I stood up and said I had something I wanted to share. The room went quiet. I could see Tyler's eyes narrow slightly, the first crack in his charming facade. I told the family that the past few years had been very difficult for me, that I had felt isolated and confused, unsure of what I had done to deserve being pushed away. I said I had done a lot of soul searching and I had finally come to understand what had happened. Then I asked everyone to listen carefully because what I was about to say would change everything. I did not accuse Tyler directly, not at first. Instead, I told them about Aunt Evelyn's will. I explained that she had left me a significant inheritance and that she had specifically excluded Tyler from receiving any portion of it. I read aloud the portion of Aunt Evelyn's will that explained her reasoning, how she had been disappointed by what she had learned about Tyler's character, how she had wanted her money to go to someone who had earned their success. I watched the family's faces as the implications sank in. Some looked confused, others looked uncomfortable. Tyler's face had gone pale. Then I told them about the investigation. I told them about Stephanie Mitchell, about the anonymous complaints, about the deliberate campaign to destroy my career. I played a portion of the recording where Stephanie admitted that Tyler had orchestrated the whole thing. I read some of his text messages out loud, watching the horror dawn on my mother's face as she heard her grandson describe his glee at my suffering. I told them about his pattern of financial misconduct, the ex-girlfriend with the student loans, the relatives he had never repaid, the investors who had lost money. I laid out the evidence, piece by piece, calmly and methodically, the way I had learned to present business cases over 30 years of corporate experience. When I finished, the room was silent. Tyler's parents were staring at him with expressions I could not quite read. My mother was crying. Several relatives had their mouths open in shock. And Tyler, my beloved nephew, the boy I had raised like my own son, looked at me with pure hatred in his eyes. For the first time, he was not charming. For the first time, the mask had slipped completely. "You are lying," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "You are just trying to turn everyone against me because you're bitter and jealous. You've always been jealous of me. You could never stand that I might actually succeed on my own without your help." I looked at him calmly. "Tyler," I said, "I have recordings, I have text messages, I have sworn affidavits, I have a private investigator who will testify to everything she discovered. This is not my word against yours. This is evidence. And if you deny it, I will be happy to share all of it with law enforcement and let them decide what to do." That last part was calculated. I had consulted with Robert Chen and with an attorney who specialized in criminal law. What Tyler had done to me at work, the manipulation of human resources, the filing of false complaints, the potential fraud, could be prosecuted if I chose to pursue it. I was not sure I wanted to go that far. I had never wanted revenge in the sense of seeing Tyler in prison. What I wanted was for the truth to come out, for my family to understand what had really happened, for my name to be cleared. But Tyler did not know that. For all he knew, I was prepared to have him arrested right there at my mother's birthday party. His parents tried to intervene. Richard stood up and said there had to be some misunderstanding, that Tyler would never do something like this. Sandra accused me of being vindictive and cruel, of trying to destroy her son because I was jealous of his success. But even as they spoke, I could see the doubt in their eyes. They had heard the recordings, they had seen the text messages, they knew the evidence was real. And somewhere deep down, I think they had always suspected that something was not quite right with their son. They had just never wanted to admit it. The party ended shortly after that. People drifted away in awkward clusters, whispering among themselves. Tyler left with his parents, refusing to look at me. My mother came over to me, her face streaked with tears, and asked me if it was all true. I told her it was. I showed her the full evidence file, let her read through everything at her own pace. By the time she finished, she was sobbing. She apologized over and over for not believing me, for pulling away, for allowing Tyler to manipulate her. I held her and told her it was not her fault. Tyler had fooled everyone. That was what he did. Over the following weeks, the fallout spread through my family like ripples in a pond. Relatives who had shunned me started calling to apologize. Some of them shared their own stories about Tyler, incidents they had brushed off or made excuses for that now seemed much more significant in light of what they had learned. The ex-girlfriend came forward publicly, posting about what Tyler had done to her on social media, which prompted other women to share their experiences with him. It turned out Tyler had a pattern of using and discarding women, leaving financial and emotional wreckage in his wake. Investors from his failed real estate venture hired an attorney to explore whether they had grounds for a civil lawsuit, and Stephanie Mitchell, emboldened by the support she received after her story became public, filed a formal complaint with the company where we had both worked, leading to an internal investigation that ultimately resulted in several procedural reforms. Tyler's parents tried to stand by him at first, but as more and more evidence emerged, as more and more victims came forward, even they could not deny the truth. About 2 months after my mother's birthday party, Richard called me for the first time in over a year. He was crying. He said he did not know how he had raised such a monster. He said he was sorry for everything, for taking Tyler's side, for cutting me off, for believing lies about me. He said he had spent his whole life feeling like a failure compared to me, and Tyler had exploited that insecurity to turn him against his own sister. I told him I forgave him. I meant it. Richard was not a bad person. He was weak and easily manipulated, but he was not cruel. He had been used just like everyone else. Tyler's downfall was not dramatic in the way you might expect. There was no big trial, no public humiliation, no moment where he fell to his knees and begged for forgiveness. Instead, it was a slow, quiet unraveling. The investors sued him and won a judgment that wiped out his savings. His reputation in the business community was destroyed, making it nearly impossible for him to find work. The woman he was dating when everything came out broke up with him immediately. His social circle, the friends he had cultivated so carefully, disappeared almost overnight. No one wanted to be associated with someone who had been exposed as a manipulator and a fraud. His parents eventually stopped enabling him after they realized that every time they helped him, he found a new way to use them. Last I heard, Tyler had moved to another state, working some low-level job, living in a small apartment alone. I do not take pleasure in his suffering, but I cannot pretend I feel sorry for him either. He made choices, he faced consequences. That is how justice works. For me, the aftermath was bittersweet. I had my family back, or at least most of them. Some relatives were too embarrassed by how they had treated me to repair the relationship. Others needed time to process everything. But my mother and I are closer now than we have ever been. Richard and I have rebuilt our relationship, slowly and carefully, with honest conversations about the patterns that allowed Tyler to manipulate us. Even Sandra, who was the last to accept the truth, eventually acknowledged that I had never been the enemy. Emily, my daughter, stood by me through everything, and our bond is stronger than ever. She is the one who encouraged me to share this story, to help others recognize the signs of manipulation before it is too late. As for my career, that could not be fully restored. The damage Tyler did was too extensive. But I negotiated a fair severance package from my company after threatening to go public with what had happened, and combined with Aunt Evelyn's inheritance, I am financially secure for the rest of my life. I spend my time now doing consulting work, mentoring young women in the medical device industry, and volunteering for organizations that support victims of financial fraud and emotional abuse. I have found purpose in helping others avoid what I went through, in teaching them to trust their instincts when something feels wrong, in reminding them that blood is not always thicker than water. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I could have seen this coming. Were there signs when Tyler was young that he would grow up to be what he became? Were there moments when I should have recognized the coldness behind his charm, the calculation behind his smiles? Probably. But love makes us blind. Love makes us want to see the best in people, especially people we have raised and nurtured and given everything to. Tyler exploited that love, used it as a weapon against me, and nearly destroyed everything I had built. But he underestimated me. He underestimated my resilience, my patience, my ability to think strategically even when I was drowning in pain and confusion. He thought he could break me, but he only made me stronger. The last time I saw Tyler was about 6 months after the truth came out. He showed up at my house unannounced, looking haggard and desperate. He said he wanted to apologize. He said he had made mistakes, that he understood now how much he had hurt me, that he wanted a chance to make things right. For a moment, I almost believed him. That is the power of a lifetime of love, that it can make you want to forgive even the unforgivable. But I looked into his eyes and I saw the same coldness that had always been there, hidden behind charm and smiles. He was not sorry. He was desperate. He had burned every bridge, alienated every ally, and I was his last hope for rescue. He was not offering genuine remorse. He was making another calculated move to save himself. I told him to leave. I told him that I would always love the child he had been, the baby I had held in my arms, the little boy who had called me his favorite aunt. But the man he had become was a stranger, and I could not allow that stranger back into my life. He left without another word. I have not seen him since. Some nights I still think about him. I wonder if there is a universe where things turned out differently, where Tyler grew up to be kind instead of cruel, where he used his intelligence and charm for good instead of manipulation. I grieve for the nephew I lost, even as I celebrate my freedom from the monster he became. Healing is not linear. Some days I feel strong and certain. Other days, the betrayal feels as fresh as it did 2 years ago. But I keep moving forward because that is what survivors do. If you are going through something similar, if someone you love is systematically trying to destroy you and you do not understand why, I want you to know that you are not crazy. You are not imagining things. Manipulation can be so subtle, so gradual, that by the time you realize what is happening, you are already deep in the fog. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Find people who believe you, and do not be afraid to fight back strategically, patiently, legally. The truth has a way of coming out eventually. Sometimes it just needs a little help. My name is Maggie Thornton. I am 54 years old. My nephew turned the whole family against me, and it nearly cost me everything. But I survived. I exposed the truth. I reclaimed my family and my peace of mind. And if I can do